the overlapping kind of relationships between users, producers, intermediaries, and external actors such as funders, such as multilateral organizations that influence the way that evidence is produced and demanded. And then the next ring around is the pathways of change, the kind of journey through which evidence, the intermediate journeys through which evidence can be kind of developed and translated into policy. So things like developing evidence cultures within organizations, setting up structures and processes that facilitate evidence use, and so on. Leading to an outer ring of our evidence-informed policymaking outcomes. And again, we've sort of divided this into 4 domains here that capture attitudinal and behavioral changes around the use of evidence through to conceptual changes, thinking about the ways that policymakers think about issues or the frameworks that they use, procedural outcomes around the processes of policy debates, for example, the way that evidence is brought into policy processes, and then finally the content outcomes where evidence is influencing the substance of policy. And all of this is sort of moderated by these black dotted lines of our contextual factors. So I'll just quickly move to the next slide, please, which is the EIPM measures inventory, which is the companion to the conceptual framework. So all of the constructs that I'm conscious I very quickly described, we had a look at the methodological literature to understand what measures might exist to be able, if we're interested in understanding, is evidence influencing policies around evidence use, what measures exist that might be able to tell us if this is happening. And so there's an inventory of 125 measures from 168 studies that we identified, and so lots of options there. And so the inventory is designed in a way that provides a sort of snapshot of the use cases where these measures were developed and how they've been used. And if we go to the next slide, please, then there's also a more in-depth kind of page to find the underlying information. If we go to the next slide, I'll just quickly talk about the mapping against the conceptual framework because I think there are some really interesting insights here. One of them being the preponderance of measures that focus on attitudes and behaviors around evidence use, much more than some of the other outcome domains. And so I think there's a big opportunity to be thinking about how can we use methods, how can we design measures that move beyond asking policymakers how they feel about evidence, but can we get to a point where we're starting to understand how that translates into actual policy outcomes or more observable policy processes. I think the other one is interesting around, so we also looked at evidence of validity and reliability of these measures, so we looked at the process through which they were developed and how robust they might be, and found a sort of pleasant number of them had gone through these very rigorous processes of validation, but I think still lots of opportunities to think about the transferability of measures to new contexts across sectors, use outside of the original use cases. But I'm conscious of time, so I will quickly start to wrap up. And so we will be operationalizing these tools in strands 2 and 3, which we'll commission. So this will be our first opportunity to understand, applying these tools in the context of new research. So we really look forward to feedback on those. And I'll just end by returning, next slide please, to the question that I began with, which is how can we make this research that we fund the most impactful? And I quickly threw this in. There were some more nuggets this morning, but I've been taking down lots of words of wisdom that we've heard throughout the event around some of the pitfalls in this space, particularly when it comes to international funders. And so this idea from Patrick about investing in systems, not just projects, Harsha saying the focus on processes rather than products, I loved Asad's introduction yesterday around responding to local priorities and being really reflective about what's needed. And this overarching idea that's come up a lot around avoiding siloing and really being inclusive in sharing learning and breaking those barriers. So I think we're definitely mindful of all of these, and we're designing the program in a way that we want it to be more than the sum of its parts. So we want it to be a portfolio, not just individual projects. We want to be able to synthesize the learning. We want to be able to work with others in this area to be able to share and develop learning in this space. But I would very much welcome your reflections and your inputs to help us design research that will be the most useful for everyone here. So I'll leave it there.
Cool. Thanks so much. I think even the power outage didn't throw you off your game. So, right. I think the next part of this session is really just to get panel reflections on applying evidence in policymaking and implications of the work that was just presented. Yeah, so I think let me just start open if anyone wants to volunteer. There we go.
Merci beaucoup. Des remerciements aussi à l'endroit des présentateurs qui ont partagé des informations utiles relatives un peu à l'écosystème de manière globale sur les données probantes. La lecture que nous pouvons avoir de ces deux présentations, c'est à la fois une lecture de la situation actuelle qui montre l'existence des données, mais qui cache aussi beaucoup de disparités, notamment disparités en termes de disponibilité de ces données. Si on prend l'échelle, je pense que la plupart de ces données-là sont concentrées dans les pays en développement. L'autre aspect, lorsqu'on regarde aussi les pays en développement, plutôt en voie de développement, il y a aussi une inégalité à l'échelle de la région. On voit aussi que les études sont plus concentrées en Afrique de l'Est. Mais au-delà aussi, un critère qui n'est pas sorti, c'est si on regarde ces pays-là, tous ces pays-là sont des pays anglophones. Donc on voit pratiquement, il n'y a pas de données peut-être par rapport à des pays francophones. Le deuxième point que je voudrais relever, c'est par rapport aussi à la concentration thématique de ces données-là. On regarde, on veut aller à l'impact, mais les données qui sont présentées sont plus ou moins relevées sur la capacité des utilisateurs à pouvoir accommoder ces données-là. Donc on voit une certaine concentration par rapport à ça. L'autre aspect aussi que ces études relèvent, c'est par rapport à la mise en place de ces méthodologies-là. Il y a une disparité souvent lorsqu'on prend les différents secteurs en termes d'utilisation de ces méthodologies-là. Je pense que l'autre point, c'est quelle est l'approche sur l'harmonisation de ces études-là. L'importance, si je reviens un peu sur l'évidence ou bien les données probantes, elles permettent de régler deux aspects. La complexité, mais l'autre aspect aussi, c'est rendre visible ce qui est invisible. Je donne juste un exemple dans la salle. Si je regarde la salle, je vois des hommes et des femmes en termes de données. Mais les particularités de chaque personne par rapport à ce qu'elle souffre comme maladie, à quoi elle est allergique, quelle est l'origine de cette personne-là. Si on n'a pas des données, je vois la donnée primaire ne me permet pas d'aller dans ces détails-là. Donc aujourd'hui, la donnée doit aider les gouvernements à un peu décomplexifier ce qui est complexe. Parce que lorsqu'on parle de développement de manière globale, c'est le complexe. Mais le plus souvent aussi, c'est qu'on n'arrive pas à voir l'invisible. Ça, c'est ces deux aspects. Et le troisième aspect que je voudrais aborder est un peu relatif à l'approche que nous avons même de l'utilisation des données. Parce que pourquoi on a ce frein par rapport aux acteurs de l'utilisation des données? Parce que nous en avons considéré comme une science nouvelle. Mais la décision, elle est toujours basée sur quelque chose. Que ce soit une donnée factuelle ou une donnée explicite. Mais si nous approchons le politique, c'est comme si la décision qu'elle est basée n'est basée sur rien du tout. Donc ce qui fait que dans cette approche-là, il sera un peu difficile d'inverser la tendance. Donc l'approche globale, c'est créer un écosystème dans lequel nous avons à la fois l'utilisateur de données mais aussi le producteur de données pour créer le fait que des circuits puissent être établis dans une logique que la donnée puisse arriver à ceux qui l'utilisent, mais aussi que la conception de la donnée soit aussi intégrée dès le départ, les inquiétudes, mais aussi tout ce qui est orientation par rapport à la politique. Donc d'où l'intérêt d'avoir cette volonté politique au départ pour que cette donnée-là puisse être réutilisée. Merci.
Thanks. Sorry. Thanks so much. It's really insightful. I don't think I have all the answers, to be fair. Yes, Christine.
I don't have answers, but I just wanted to say, I think, Amadou, what you brought up about some of the things that the map, the current iteration of the map, has already started to show us is really interesting and is something that I think we all need to be sort of taking away. So maybe just to introduce myself. So I'm coming from the International Development Research Center, and we fund research across a range of different issues across the Global South. And I think a really important takeaway for a funder like IDRC is exactly that point that we need to understand the gaps, and we need to make sure that we're investing in those gap areas. So what are the different questions that we need to help make sure that we bolster up in an evidence map such as this one? And I think also, our mandate allows us to do this. Not every funder can, but I think we really need to make sure that the good practices and the knowledge and the research that's coming from the Global South on these issues finds itself into evidence maps such as this, so that we stop having such a skewed picture of those processes and stop relying solely on research evidence from the Global North. I think what's really exciting for me, though, about this map is, we talked about how there's studies that are looking at very specific sectors or very specific geographies, and they're all scattered. This is an opportunity to be able to draw on a much more global picture of resources and research. And it's not just geographic. I don't mean global just in terms of geographic. I mean global in terms of sectors as well, and languages. And Tanya, I'm sure you'll speak more to this, but just the fact that it's looking at sources across the 6 UN languages, it's looking across all sectors and geographies, and recognizing that, it's hard to get something perfect, but this is a much, much better opportunity than what we had before. And the last point I was going to say, just in terms of how exciting this is for me, is it's really easy for all of us to, we've been doing this in this conference of, policymakers need to be evidence-based in them making their decisions. But I think we have to turn that on ourselves as well, because, funders aren't perfect. We think of ourselves as evidence-based in how we fund research and how we commission research. But we're also human, and we've been relying on what we know from our colleagues or what we know from other funders or from the studies that we have funded and commissioned. But this allows us to draw on a much larger evidence base that looks across different sectors and geographies and the work that other funders have funded to inform and influence how we work. So it's, we've always been very rigorous in terms of being evidence-based in terms of what we fund, the themes, the topics, where we're funding particular things. But this is really about how we work, and it has implications for funders. It has implications for knowledge brokering organizations. It has implications for researchers. This is sort of fundamentally interrogating how we work if what we're striving for is for our work to be outcome focused and to have influence. And so this is really exciting to have something that we can draw from and synthesize and analyze and start to make decisions that affect all of our various practices from our different vantage points. So there's promise, but we have to use it for that promise to lead to something. So I'll stop there.
I like following Kristin because she does half of the work for me. I'm Ben Miyamoto, again, from the Impact Funders Forum. And I'll share a little bit about what we do, I think, because it picks up on the context that Kristin just described, which is we are a network of a community and a platform for funders, primarily research funders, but not exclusively, who are interested in closing the gap between research and outcomes. I think implied in that, in how a lot of funders think about this, is we invest in research or evidence or knowledge production, and that evidence then gets used in decision making, either in policy or practice, that improves the policies or practices, and those then produce better outcomes for our communities, for our environment, or for any of the other issue areas that we care about. Really critically, at the sort of center of that logic model, which is oversimplified, is the use of that evidence and understanding the systems and practices and mechanisms that develop that. For us, funders, looking at the sort of ecosystem across, and we have funders, government agencies, but also philanthropies working across the geographies, but also issue areas, who all sort of realized we are asking these same questions and thinking towards the same sort of end goal of outcomes in our different places, using very different words, research use, evidence uptake, knowledge translation or knowledge mobilization, which all have sort of distinct definitions, but were substantively, there were some core questions that were the same. So there are sort of three pieces that we've identified that folks were trying to work on separately, but we'd be better to work on together. And I think they're really central to what's being discussed here today. So the first is, and probably most closely related to the evidence map and some of the research that's being produced by the RCC at FCDO, is understanding what works to close that gap. So it's understanding the mechanisms, it's understanding the conditions under which those different evidence use mechanisms work, and then understanding the systems that have to be in place to facilitate those conditions. The second piece is investing in those, and Kristin just touched on that. It's not only what kind of work you're investing in, but how you're doing that. So supporting, sort of using research funding processes that allow for the relationship building, that allow for the time needed to develop the partnerships, that also support not only the projects, but the systems and the infrastructure needed to do that over time. So understanding what works or knowing what works, investing in that, and not only what, but how, and then last is investing in sort of building the infrastructure and systems to support those. So across those three things, folks were trying to do this, research funders and other funders and government and philanthropy were doing this in different sectors and in different issue areas, but separately, and so together I think we're better off and sort of more able to move the needle. And so what that leads me back to is some of these ideas about inequities across the system and understanding. I think we're much better equipped if we have these conversations together. It's not so long ago that investments like FCDO's Research Commissioning Center on Evidence-Informed Policymaking could have been totally distinct from some of the other conversations. And I'm sure Kristin would have made sure that wasn't the case, but not that long ago that the expectation was we do this in health or we do this in one particular issue area or one geography and sort of leave it at that. But then other people would be asking those same questions. And so we're trying to move forward together, especially to attend to some of the inequities that you mentioned, because I think that for me, the use of the evidence is at its core a question about inequity. Because if we're involving more people in the research system, trying to understand how different forms of evidence are sort of can be placed next to each other and be in conversation with each other, involving those people without asking, are we using that evidence? Does it actually produce the outcomes? Not only is it used, but does it actually advance their priorities? does it improve the outcomes that they want to see improved, then we might be, I think it's always good to involve people, but their time might be better spent elsewhere. So for me, that's some of the core pieces that come out of this, and the evidence map really gets us on the same page and helps us advance those questions together. So I think you have a lot of thoughts about how to do that for funders and for other issue areas too, so I'll maybe pass it to you next.
Thanks, Ben. And thanks again to Asad and also Pace for the invitation to joining Evidence 2025. I was very excited coming here, and I'm very excited being now here in Benin. As said earlier, my name is Tanja Kuchenmueller, and I'm working for the World Health Organization. So my comment is slightly coming from a different perspective than what the funders next to me have been saying, but in many ways it's also closely aligned. So WHO is an organization that sees itself as a science and evidence-based organization, and in that sense, the evidence map is not only allowing us to understand what works, but also really to walk the talk. So for us, I'm working in the science division, leading the unit that is looking particularly at using evidence for decision making, promoting and supporting capacity building and strengthening at country level. So how do we actually use evidence in our own programming, in our own strategy development? And the map is really a fantastic tool for that. So for us to use it internally, but for us also to use it when we work with member states, we have a network which is called the Evidence Informed Policy Network, really one of the long-standing initiatives working in health and health-related areas. After all, it's health in all policies that is looking at strengthening and institutionalizing the use of evidence at country level. And very pleased to see that we have a number of EVIPNet teams here also in the room of Nigeria and of Ethiopia. Chile was here until just a minute ago, and we have Brazil here. So it's really wonderful also to see these different communities come together, because we don't want to create silos. We want to allow for interactions to happen and cross-sectoral learning to be facilitated. So the evidence map has really helped us do that, as I said, to better walk the talk. On the other hand, the map has also been fundamental for another initiative that we embarked on in 2023, that is developing a global research agenda on knowledge translation and evidence-informed policy. And WHO has as one of its core mandates to develop global research agendas. In general, it's more linked to, let's say, malaria or HIV, health and migration. Now, we have, for the very first time, as a collective effort, with more than 130 interest holders throughout the world, coming from 40 different countries, developed this new research agenda, which is multi-sectoral, looking specifically at what research gaps exist in knowledge translation and evidence-informed policy. And that again allows us not only to identify where are the gaps and which gaps need to be prioritized, but at the same time also that funders and researchers can better coordinate where to fill the gaps. Right? This is a global research agenda, and we have now 19 research domains, not research questions, but research domains that were identified, and we're going to take them forward at a global level. But we really need to also join forces so that the global research agenda is being contextualized at regional level and at country level. And Amadou, when it comes to West Africa, where indeed there is a huge gap in terms of research on evidence-informed policy making and knowledge translation, we've been working with Fréjus, and he seems very keen in adapting the global research agenda to West Africa, so that again we can move this area of better understanding what works, and maybe also tackling the big black box of impact, right? So that we can do that jointly, not in an individual project-based manner, but really more holistically as a collective effort. So. In that sense, we have so far already been using the map a lot, and we will continue doing so.
Hi, everyone. So, what I love about this map is called The Art and Science of Using Evidence. And even though I'm a scientist, I'm very reluctant in this title, and I prefer to think that I'm an artist. And I think in Latin America and the Caribbean, and I believe in Africa also, we are big artists. And art provokes feelings. So when I see the map that Zafeer presented, and I look at Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa, and I see such pale colors in terms of numbers of studies about the use of evidence. But then I look to the United States and I see the super blue. I get rage. This is the feeling that I feel. And why do I feel rage? Because all of the best examples that I know and that have based the way that we promote evidence use in Brazil have come from Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean. They haven't come from the United States. And I've been in many events with some people from the United States, and I struggle to find that they have all of this knowledge about how evidence can be used. So how come, even though we are producing so much knowledge, how come we are maintaining relationships with governments, sustaining them throughout time, 20 years, 30 years, some of the organizations here have been working together, our map is still pale in these regions? I think this is a question that I resonate with my colleagues. And then when I'm saying that we are artists, what do I mean, right? So just before our session started, I was late to get to the stand here because it was 6:30 a.m. in the morning in Brazil, and a civil servant from the Ministry of Agriculture in Brazil and Family Agriculture and Development was writing to me in the WhatsApp asking for some prompt evidence because she needed to present something because Brazil is hosting the COP later in November. So I was trying to message her about this, and then while we had the electronic shutdown in my WhatsApp, the Ministry of Human Rights in Brazil wrote again asking for some nominations because they develop a prize for evidence that is useful to their decision making, and they want to disseminate to organizations that have been producing knowledge translation products. So they wanted me to tell them who they can reach out to. All of this was way before working hours, like formal working hours in Brazil, 9 to 5. So these are artists. Our civil servants from the government are artists that wake up thinking, how can they make better decisions? And the way they connect with me as a knowledge intermediary, and in our region, we have so many great examples, as Tanja mentioned, so many beautiful colleagues from Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, from Uganda, from Cameroon, that we've learned so much to develop our centers in Brazil. We are doing this through relationship building, through informality, through WhatsApp use. And this is a very difficult research to carry. It's been a while since I've read like the last paper of PACE about their long-lasting relationship with the South African government. And this is not because you are not doing every day this type of relationship. It's just because the types of activities that require the evidence to get to policymakers and actually be used are so hard to monitor. And I'm sure that if I wrote you an international paper, an article about the WhatsApp use for evidence use, maybe it wouldn't be accepted, right? So I feel rage because most of these examples that have inspired us for so long are brewed in our lands, but when we look at these global maps, they're still overrepresented in lands that receive way more money and way more resources, including time, to be studying these practices, but not necessarily they are living this and breathing this as so many of you are. And I think it's like way past the time that we change this together. We have beautiful opportunities of funding, which is always good for these regions. We have beautiful global agendas that need to be customized and contextualized to our reality. So it's amazing that ACID will probably do this for West Africa, and of course we need to do this for Latin America and the Caribbean. We have amazing tools, such as the tool that my colleague Kristin Corbett created, that matches the questions that governments have with methodologies for research, so we can further developed this, shortened this gap, is the matching QM tool. If you want to see it, it's very nice. We applied with the Ministry of Human Rights in Brazil, and it was very useful. And we have this map to change. This is my motivation when I see this map. The next iteration, in 2 years' time, we need to have very bold blue colors in the south and maybe start paling up a little bit of the global north. And this is my motivation. Sorry, the colleague was doing, this is slow? Oh, sorry. This is not, Brazilians are terrible at this, so sorry. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think that's very interesting. I think for me, one of the big things is there is definitely something around the togetherness that we all need to have, and I think also the mechanisms also kind of tie in. I think all of these, a lot of the points, they really tie in closely, working together, addressing questions, identifying questions also together. So, oh, should I? I should. Oh, for the camera. That's funny. No, I think just on a whole, thank you all so much for being part of this panel. There's still one other activity where we get questions from the crowd, so it's not all done, but I really appreciate all the insights and inputs, and I do hope that without any data manipulation whatsoever, that the bubbles are bigger next time. But yeah. So I think just for the next part of this section is just that we have, if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, please, it would be really nice if you can just, first, 1, 2, 3, oh, quite a few. Sure, so I think maybe we start there and go around, and then, okay.
Merci beaucoup. Merci pour les brillantes interventions. Moi, c'est Ndefa Tsissé, sociologue, chercheur expert de genre à e-think tank. Par rapport à votre exposé, je ne sais pas si c'est une question ou bien une contribution sur les acteurs de l'écosystème des données. Autant les décideurs doivent être formés sur la valorisation et l'utilisation des données, mais autant aussi, je pense, les producteurs aussi des données doivent être formés et outillés sur certaines questions. Je parle de ça parce que à travers un projet que nous sommes en train de mettre en œuvre avec l'appui de Sudan Base sur la valorisation des données pour promouvoir l'entrepreneuriat féminin et l'autonomisation des femmes, que nous mettons aussi en œuvre avec les autorités publiques, particulièrement avec le ministère en charge des questions de l'autonomisation des femmes. Il nous est arrivé au moment de la collecte et de l'analyse des données d'avoir des discussions qui nous ont un peu retardés dans le processus avec un collaborateur qui, lorsqu'il s'agissait d'analyser les indicateurs relatifs à la violence basée sur le genre et l'impact de ces violences sur le parcours entrepreneurial de ces femmes, un des collaborateurs a dit qu'il n'était pas d'accord avec cet indicateur parce que voilà, que c'était un indicateur qui était relatif et on ne peut pas se permettre d'intégrer ça dans le processus d'analyse voilà, des données voilà, sur le profilage de l'entrepreneuriat féminin et de l'autonomisation économique des femmes. Et bon, on a discuté, on a échangé, mais ça m'a aussi, j'ai eu aussi des inquiétudes si les producteurs de données aussi ne sont pas assez sensibilisés sur les questions d'autonomisation, de violence basée sur le genre. Comment est-ce qu'ils peuvent capter ces informations alors que c'est des informations très importantes. Donc c'est très intéressant de réfléchir aussi sur cet apprentissage qui va dans les deux sens, aussi bien chez les décideurs que chez les producteurs de données. Sur la question de l'utilisation des nouvelles technologies comme le WhatsApp, ça me paraît très très pertinent et ça nous amène aussi avoir une analyse critique et épistémologique aussi sur les méthodes de recherche, parce que c'est des choses qu'on ne peut plus ignorer. Nous, on a eu à expérimenter dans le cadre des Assises nationales de la jeunesse en partenariat avec la CEDEAO, où nous avons ratissé large dans le processus de collecte des données. On ne s'est pas seulement contenté de la méthode classique de collecte et de recueil des données. Nous avons exploité les outils comme le Twitter X à travers le Space, aussi le WhatsApp, le Facebook à travers des webinaires. Donc ça a été une plateforme, les plateformes digitales ont été exploitées et nous avons eu des résultats très très intéressants là-dessus. Merci beaucoup.
Hi everyone, and thank you for that beautiful presentations and all the interventions. So my name is Rigobert Pambe, and I work with eBay's Africa. So I want to start by saying I really love evidence gap map. And from my experience, we did one in Cameroon on foundational learning, foundational literacy and numeracy. And so our greatest surprise when we were sharing this with policymakers, we noticed that there is a slight dissonance between what our evidence gap map says and policy priorities. So they don't like align at 100%. So there are some key aspects around policy priorities, or even what teachers are facing in the classroom, that are not in the evidence gap map, or that are not like, these are the greatest gap. So what I'm trying to say is that at times, the gap we are seeing on the gap map does not translate directly to the priorities and need from the teachers and the policymakers. And my question is, how do we ensure, if we are funding studies, that what we are funding doesn't replicate these academic biases that we are seeing in the gap map?
Alors, bonjour à tous. Merci beaucoup pour les panélistes pour vos interventions. Et je me présente, je m'appelle Tanja Kuchenmueller, je suis sénégalaise, jeune chercheur au laboratoire de recherche économique et monétaire à l'Université Cheikh Anta Diop de Dakar. Je contribue à un projet Behind the Scene, coordonné par l'ICRW. Ma question, ou bien c'est une préoccupation par rapport aux défis, c'est-à-dire aux défis liés à la durabilité. Parce que certainement, la plupart des recherches, surtout en Afrique francophone, ce sont des projets de recherche et ce sont des contrats. Et si le contrat se termine, bon, il n'y a pas d'impact, il n'y a pas de suivi. Et aussi, l'autre défi, c'est par rapport aux politiques. Parce qu'il y a des recherches, quand tu fais des recherches et que tu as des résultats, peut-être les résultats n'arrangent pas le gouvernement, ils seront rangés sur les tiroirs et ne seront pas publiés, ne seront pas pris en compte, alors que ces données, on pourrait les utiliser pour quand même se développer ou bien pour changer la donne. Et ma question, c'est-à-dire en tant que jeune chercheur, comment s'y prendre par rapport à ces défis-là? Merci.
Hi, I think maybe we start with those, just because I feel like there's quite a few, if that's okay. Does anyone have any?
Hi. To answer to our colleague that works in eBay's, hello. Right now we are doing something that I find is very interesting with Cochrane. Cochrane, that is a global organization, received some money to do gap maps on dengue, which is a very south-based disease, right? And then they had the good sense of understanding that probably the team in the UK wouldn't be the best to understand what could be the lines of interventions and outcomes for dengue prevention, because they have no lived experience in this. And then they invited us in Brazil to conduct stakeholder dialogues and consultation, qualitative consultation, prior to designing all of the gap map protocol. So the priorities, we interviewed policymakers, local health workers in Amazonian communities, citizen leaderships related to this, and they helped to list all the interventions that they made and all of the outcomes that either they were following in the management, like the city level governments or the state level governments, or that they were following as health workers in their day-to-day work. And this helped to inform the intervention and outcomes categories that they undertook in the protocol. And now the map has its first iteration, and we are going to do a very broad stakeholder dialogue, one to test using this map, because for many places in Brazil, all of these technologies are like completely new. People are not used to interacting with this, so is this useful for them? Is this accessible? Do they have any feedback relating to the usability of the map, plus developing prioritization of, among the gaps identify, what would be the most useful for imminent practices in the region. So I think this is a nice example. Of course, I would prefer if the full money came to Brazil to do this, but it came to Cochrane, so I thank Cochrane to at least inviting us for the stakeholder mobilization.
Merci. Je voulais juste peut-être revenir par rapport à la question relative à la durabilité. C'est vrai que c'est un problème qui se pose, mais je pense que le problème n'est pas simplement un problème de budget, mais c'est de la reconnaissance même de l'importance de la connaissance ou des données dans le développement. Parce que pour ce qui est un budget, ça commence toujours par une volonté politique. S'il n'y a pas une volonté politique qui reconnaît qu'aujourd'hui, dans le cadre du plan de développement général de ces États-là, la donnée ou la recherche occupe une place prépondérante. Je regarde le plus souvent dans nos pays. Si tu rencontres souvent le chercheur, je pense que l'université, qui est dans tous les pays, on trouve les universités. L'État investit. Mais dans le cadre du plan global de développement, ce qui est à l'université est rarement lié à ce que se fait. Rarement tu vois une université qui est liée à un ministère. Alors que l'État investit dans ce ministère-là, et lorsqu'on a besoin de ces données, l'État recrute des firmes peut-être nationales ou internationales à produire des données, alors qu'il y a des universités dans ce pays même qui... Donc c'est-à-dire qu'il y a ce lien qu'il faut créer, mais au-delà aussi que la recherche soit co-créative. Il faut qu'au niveau de l'université, lorsque peut-être que l'agenda de la recherche soit un agenda au niveau national qui est arrimé au plan de développement. Pour chaque pays a un plan de développement. Je prends le cas du Sénégal. On vient récemment de lancer Sénégal de 2050, qui est un plan de développement. Mais aujourd'hui, est-ce que ce plan-là est étudié au niveau de l'université, de sorte que toutes les priorités au niveau de ce plan-là soient intégrées dans l'agenda de recherche? Je pense qu'il y a ces éléments à faire. Mais l'autre aspect aussi que je voudrais peut-être là finir, c'est par rapport, même au niveau du mapping, est-ce qu'on connaît aujourd'hui? C'est-à-dire que pour que l'État investisse, il faut qu'il comprenne le retour sur l'investissement. Est-ce qu'on connaît aujourd'hui le retour sur l'investissement, sur la valeur politique de la donnée? Parce que si le décideur, il a besoin de comprendre, si j'investis sur la donnée, quelle est la valeur de retour en termes de politique? Quelle est la valeur économique de la donnée? Quelle est la valeur sociale de la donnée? Je pense qu'en termes pour que cet écosystème-là puisse se créer et que l'État puisse s'intéresser à cela, je pense dans le domaine à la fois de cette cartographie-là, mais aussi des évidences que nous pouvons donner à l'État, nous allons aller au-delà juste de l'importance de l'utilisation de la donnée, mais aller plus loin à démontrer aujourd'hui, lorsque par exemple j'investis $1 sur la donnée, quelle est la rentabilité que j'ai au niveau économique, au niveau social et au niveau politique. Je pense que si on arrive à ce lieu-là, je pense qu'on donnera plus d'éléments à l'autorité à prendre une décision. Parce qu'elle est tournée autour de ces trois éléments-là, l'économie, le social et à la fois politique. Je pense que dans les prochaines années, je pense qu'on a posé la question au début, dans les 10 ans, que devons-nous faire? Je pense qu'on doit aller au-delà de démontrer l'importance de ces données-là, mais donner quelle est la valeur en termes d'investissement et de retour par rapport à l'utilisation de ces données-là.
Yeah, I have one quick, I think, something that we talked about briefly that just responds to the evidence gap map question. I can share something also briefly about the sort of mismatch between policy demand and sort of the research production. But first on the gap map, just one potential suggestion, not being involved in any of the projects, so take this as you will. We talked about this a little bit, so hopefully not too out of step. But adding the funders in the evidence gap map to understand that might produce this sort of interesting lever to say who is funding what, and especially in the conversation about national research agendas. I think Asad has put together something similar that might inform that, but if there's policy priorities clearly articulated by the government, and then a sense of what evidence is being produced and where and who's producing it really importantly, and there's a gap there, and you can also see who's funding what evidence, then I think there's sort of more relational accountability about who, or potential for relational accountability about who's funding what in what areas, to whom, and then is that getting used? Because it might be, yeah, so there's one idea that is maybe kind of hard to operationalize, but an idea. And then the other, I just want to say I sympathize with the question / comment about we're producing research and the findings aren't sort of well suited for the policy decision-making process. And I think for me, this sort of emphasizes, I've in my previous role my main role was helping researchers communicate their expertise to journalists or policymakers or civic organizations. And so my only sort of recommendation on that front is I think developing that relationship with those folks where the findings that you have or that you think are most useful or you know are most useful in some cases might not be the first entry point into that conversation. So it might be that they have in that window of time a need for research or evidence that you don't have, but that you are more well equipped to find the right person to answer that question, and that might make them more able to come back to you later on when there's a window to use the findings that you think are available. So it's not a great response, but mostly just wanted to say I sympathize. It's tough, and it takes a long time.
Thanks. I think we can take a couple more questions. We have about 17 minutes, so there's someone that has the mic already. So.
Merci. Un grand merci aux panélistes. J'avais deux aspects à aborder. Et je m'appelle Draman Koulibaly, je suis donc du l'UNG, le Centre d'études économiques et sociales de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, à Ouaga. Alors, je reviens sur la question de l'interaction, avec un cas précis. Et au Burkina, le ministère de la Santé a conduit des études pour mesurer l'impact des intrants chimiques au niveau des communautés. Alors, la finalité de l'étude, c'est quoi? Est-ce que c'est pour avoir simplement la connaissance ou bien est-ce que c'est pour agir sur les pratiques agricoles ou les politiques agricoles? Donc, du coup, nous avons relevé en disant, bon, si cette étude n'est pas menée par le ministère de la Santé et le ministère de l'Agriculture, on aura même les germes du blocage de l'utilisation de cette donnée-là. Parce que ce sera comme pour contrer le ministère de l'Agriculture dans sa façon d'aborder les choses. Du coup, les résultats auront peu d'impact parce que bloqués même par le fait que, voilà, entre les deux ministères, il peut y avoir des problèmes. Et on a plein de cas comme ça parce qu'on n'a pas réellement, on n'est pas allé jusqu'au bout, comme M. Gueye disait, pour voir quelle va être la rentabilité, quelle va être la finalité. Voilà, si on veut impacter sur les pratiques agricoles ou la politique agricole, c'est bon qu'on intègre le système, tous les acteurs qui sont concernés par cela. Donc, la question de l'interaction est extrêmement importante. Et deuxième aspect, je vais m'arrêter là, c'est effectivement le circuit de la donnée. Là encore, ça renvoie à la question de la rentabilité. Je suis un chercheur, j'ai travaillé sur une sémence donnée, je sors avec une sémence avec des qualités, Et de sorte qu'effectivement, si cette semence est adoptée par le gouvernement, ben, ça va impacter le rendement, etc. Mais, quelque part, comme le chercheur, il s'arrête où? Dès que la semence est reconnue, certifiée, il a publié, et c'est comme si son travail s'arrête là. Alors que, bien sûr, ces résultats-là, c'est effectivement des recherches techniques, c'est de l'expérimentation, souvent ça s'arrête à l'expérimentation, mais après il faut que la donnée va sur le terrain en termes de vulgarisation. Et le retour, quand est-ce qu'on sait, qui s'intéresse à ces retours-là? En général, ce n'est plus les mêmes chercheurs. C'est peut-être d'autres praticiens qui vont aller voir les bonnes pratiques et comment cette semence a évolué, la maturation qu'il y a eu sur le terrain. C'est d'autres qui vont le faire. De telle sorte qu'on ne voit pas très bien les liens entre ce travail au début et la finalité qui a été qu'effectivement, les rendements ont été bien améliorés, mais ça a posé d'autres contraintes, etc. Donc, c'est le fait que souvent la vision n'est pas de longue durée sur la donnée, son utilisation et l'impact qui fait que ça limite quelquefois l'adoption au niveau politique. Comme il a dit, effectivement, si je sors cette semence-là, est-ce que je suis en même de dire, effectivement, si c'est adopté, voilà quel va être l'impact sur le système de production de mon pays plus tard, pour que le gouvernement puisse dire, ah oui, ça, c'est important d'y aller. Voilà, donc c'est pour encore dire, il est important qu'on se projette sur la rentabilité, la finalité économique, sociale, environnementale, pour que ça prenne encore d'autres dimensions. Merci.
Thank you very much for the great discussions that we've been able to have the privilege to listen to from partners, funders, and I think what I'll be excited to, or I'll be happy to get from the panel is the play field for accessing funding when we write proposals. Now, there are two things that I see in play. On one hand, there is the challenge with articulating in the English or the French language, because English and French may not be our first language. So I could be saying one thing and the reviewer is hearing another thing. That's the first thing. Then the second thing is the challenge with the solutions that we are proposing. So oftentimes there are two types of solutions that we see, or maybe three in Africa. One of them is a solution that is indigenous. So we have been struggling with something, and in that struggle, we developed a coping strategy, and we feel that we could market this to a funder, and then this can be funded and we implement it. And then the other one is maybe someone from the global north who believes that they have a solution for a problem in Africa, and they develop it and they fund it. So the first thing is that the second case will resonate better with the funder and the reviewers, especially if we don't do something to work on the composition of the review team. So it means that coming from a challenge-based solution from Africa, I'm already starting the battle late or on an unfair ground. So for the partners on the panel, what strategies can we really think about, or have you, in your experience, been able to bring up? I mean, I know, for example, there could be issues around thinking about equity commitments or thinking about advisory committees. I would be happy to know about if you have had some reflections around this and how we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Justina Onuma. I'm from Ghana, from the Science and Technology Policy Research Institute. Thank you so much for your insightful presentations. I think really listening to you, and I know that the gentleman on the far end actually touched on the issues that I want to ask. It's really about sustainability of all these interventions. We get all these, to really have structures to improve processes of evidence use. And at the time of implementation, everything is so perfect. The policymaker is demanding the evidence, and then we are also churning out the evidence for the policymaker. Now, beyond these interventions, the issues of sustainability has really become a very big challenge that I personally have like a real kind of passion And it gets me worried that beyond these, how do we sustain all these efforts? And so as a funding mechanism, and then as a grantor, to us as grantees, what really do you want to see in probably our project proposals on issues of sustainability? How do we maintain the momentum that we establish once these interventions have ended? Because it's really a challenge that beyond the project implementation, then looks like everything goes down. How would you expect us as evidence producers, as this community, really churning out things that pathways of sustainability, so that we can actually maintain this momentum and not just a one-off kind of project intervention, and once it ends, everything goes back to bed? Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Sabit from SESDA, Ethiopia. The evidence gap map we have seen is very interesting. Yet, as Laura was also raising, the evidence in the South is lacking. There is a shortage of evidence, as AI or something brings us the already available evidence in the global arena. So even though there is gray literature or something somewhere else, it is kept somewhere else, but it's not accessible by searching or something like that. But there is evidence. How could we bring those evidence on board? Just I was thinking, the issue is about getting the best available evidence to inform policy. So the best available evidence, we can bring it by searching or the method we have at hand. And what needs to be followed is just having deliberative dialogue with experts in the local areas. Those are going to utilize those evidence. Those are those policymakers, so that they can bring on board the gray literatures, the evidence they have at hand. So that supports that evidence. Even we should go beyond that to the community level, having discussion with citizens. And so the input of the citizens comes informing the brief. The EVPNet has such an experience during the SURE project. After having a policy brief, it goes for policy dialogue, where experts give an input, and followed by the citizen panel. That minute informs the decisions. So the decision maker takes both the best available evidence from the research and the dialogue from experts, and complemented with the citizen panel. So those gaps of evidence generation, we always talk about the decolonization of evidence. We say that we use that word. That decolonization is the method. The minute by itself is an evidence, so we have to use that method so that we bring those evidence, even though it's not published. But we have to try, when we say decolonization, we have to come up some methodologies of research where this, if it goes the qualitative approach of the minute, just like FGDs, we can publish it that way and bring it on board for evidence-informed decision making. Thank you.
Thank you to the panelists for your presentations and the insights that came from those who didn't present. My comment is building on the sustainability issue, but taking it further, because I mean I do this work and I struggle sometimes because the issue of incentives and how we can meet those when we're working with maybe like government. There are some incentives there, I think, that are linked to sustainability as well. And I think when I was looking at the gap map and thinking about it, so you were looking at capabilities, motivation, opportunities to use evidence. The motivation aspect there, I think, links to incentives. And I just kept wondering, I don't remember whether I saw the map and how it looked like in terms of the studies that were found that were addressing motivation, which is where the issues of incentives would come in. I wondered whether that component could be broken down to see what is being done around incentives, because it is a big issue to address when you're talking about sustainability, because you can talk about sustainability from the perspective of external funding. Yeah, but we can't expect external funding to be funding evidence-informed decision-making forever. We want it to get institutionalized, systematized into our government systems, our broader systems, and how stakeholders engage and inform evidence. So there's the sustainability also on the government side as well, and even other stakeholders like research institutions. So the issue of incentives is huge, and I would have liked to just have a sense of people starting to look at that and how to break through that. Yeah, it's just a comment, or if anyone in the panel can respond specifically to that, that would be also great. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you for bringing the mic here. Sorry. I stole the mic from the from the panelists, but thank you. I mean, just wanted to celebrate the map and also like the name of the session. Like as Laura, I love it. Like the art of EDM. It's just like a great name. But my sort of like question for the map, right, itself was like. I feel like for like all this community, like there are many people that has been working like for many years or more than a decade now, like on how to kind of like better push evidence into decision makers' tables and works, right? But I feel on the other side, on the decision making side, particularly in politics, we are like living an entirely insane world, right? Like it's just like it feels now it's just like a political position. Like explicitly not considering evidence for making decisions right now, if that makes any sense, right? Like, and we have many examples from many things that happened like during the pandemic, like from drinking bleach until like the more recent, like sort of like a connection between paracetamol and autism, right? Like, I mean, it feels like it's just like a political position, not considering evidence, right? And I feel like the only way of kind of like trying to address that trend is somehow kind of like communicating to the communities and to citizens the importance of considering evidence in making decisions, right? So my question is just like, is in the scope of the map somehow serving that purpose, right? Like communicating the importance of using evidence, using science, considering knowledge when making political decisions at policy making level, right? Yeah.
Merci pour la présentation sur l'utilisation des données. Je suis Banamé, je viens du Togo. Je viens de la direction de la recherche scientifique et technique, une institution gouvernementale qui est chargée de coordonner les activités de recherche au pays. Je voudrais soulever 2 défis et essayer de recevoir peut-être vos approches de solutions. Le premier défi est relatif à la collecte des données probantes même. Les institutions avec lesquelles nous travaillons, l'un des défis qu'ils évoquent, c'est le fait que la population est réticente à fournir les données probantes. La population et aussi les gouvernants. Ça, c'est l'un des défis majeurs qui revient sur le terrain. Le deuxième défi, c'est... Je ne sais pas si le terme convient, je veux parler de la rupture étatique, c'est-à-dire lorsqu'il y a changement de gouvernement, il y a carrément le plan, peut-être comme un Sénégalais l'a dit tout à l'heure, on élabore un plan sur un certain nombre d'années, et quand il y a changement de gouvernement, le nouveau gouvernement qui arrive, ses priorités sont en décalage avec les priorités qui ont été fixées par l'ancien gouvernement. Et ça, ce sont des défis qu'on a vraiment du mal à surmonter. Je ne sais pas si les pays du Nord ont déjà fait face à ces défis et quelles ont été les stratégies efficaces que vous avez mises en place pour contourner ces défis. Merci une fois encore.
Thanks so much. So we do just have a little bit of time. I think we're kind of getting nudged a little bit for the venue as well. So I think I think at least from my side, I think if anyone has any 1 to 2 minute quick responses, I would probably.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to do a quick response to two of the areas that were touched upon. So first of all, the Ethiopian colleague who was talking about the fact that best available evidence is really important, whether it's primary research, secondary or tertiary. Yes, absolutely. But as you mentioned, we have to take into consideration also the tacit knowledge and the lived experience of citizens, of interest holders, of communities. That is what at least many of us, I think, consider as the knowledge translation process if we want evidence to be systematically used in policy making. So completely agree with that. Secondly, the question of sustainability, and also the colleague from Togo touched upon it when it comes to government changes. There is, of course, no blueprint here. Also WHO, and we have heard earlier in the session from Jessica, health is always seen as the sector that does everything correctly, and no, there are a lot of challenges, and one challenge is sustainability. Even at WHO, we're going through a financial crisis. So how can the organization nonetheless sustain activities in EIP, in evidence-informed policy? Exactly the questions that were brought up here in this context. And again, it's not a absolute remedy, but we developed together with others here in the room, with Laura, for example, a checklist that looks at institutionalization. It's not just about resources, financial resources, it's not just, but also it's incentives. It's an entire package of different domains where we ideally would need to look at increasing the maturity of those domains. So if one of those domains falls away, like a change of government, the other pillars, such as partnerships or existing processes and mechanisms that have become standards, can maintain the process until things fall into a better place again. And we've seen in Brazil, in the former government as well, how much dismantling has happened. But in some areas such as health, because some of the other areas, not the governance and the politics, but other areas were able to maintain processes, allowing for some sustainability until a new government has come. So it's an iterative process, and we have to continue working on it with incentives, with creativity, sometimes being an artist. So it's a journey, but if we're in this journey, I think we can make it happen. So there were a lot of questions to funders, I guess.
Okay. So from a perspective of a diverse group of funders, I think on the Patrick, I think you mentioned the sort of composition of review panels, and I think we're putting together a slot of resources that are meant to be very practical for funders, and a couple of things on that. So the diversity of review panels, but other practices that folks are using. I've seen things where funders are trying to do that engagement themselves from early on, engage with some of the evidence producers, but also sort of evidence brokers and other folks to develop the research agenda even before they put the call out. And the sort of recommendation I have on that front is tell other funders, and sort of, I think that, I don't want to overstate this, but I think that the field and grantees have a lot of power in ways that they don't recognize. It's not matched to funders, I think, in a lot of ways, but the saying as a grantee, this worked really well, or this other funder did this and it was important because XYZ, can help sort of broaden that. Because in part, funders, like everyone else, don't want to be the first to do something and don't want to do things new if they don't know that it might work. So just encourage that, and happy to talk more about that afterwards. I think related to the sustainability piece, trying to articulate to your partners internally, how can we say this leveraged other investment or the partnership and collaboration and the processes that we developed together helped us do X, Y, and Z. And you solicit your partners' help in articulating that value, either to the groups in government that sort of need to maintain that between external funding, or to other funders who might fund that and say, look, you're missing an opportunity to leverage someone else's investment in our relationships. is one way to do that, and also happy to talk more in detail about that. And then the last piece I'll say is the publishing piece in the existing incentive systems is a big gap. It's maybe a sneak preview, so a bit early to talk about the details, but we're thinking about launching in the early stages of launching a journal focused on impact, where it will be traditional journal articles, but also a wide variety of other resources, maybe the paper about the WhatsApp chain, or blog posts or other things that have DOIs, so that those pieces that are often missed in the art of this work can sort of start to surface and be sort of captured in that. So just a few quick responses there.
I don't have all the answers, but I am going to hot pursuit a little bit off of Ben and with your question, Patrick, on the funders. So, I mean, I can't speak for all funders, but there are a lot of funding organizations who are trying really hard to be really thoughtful and do this really well. And you know, things like panel review composition is a topic that comes up very often within funding organizations, but also across funding organizations. And I think there's a real sincere interest among funders to learn from each other, and I think the value of the Impact Funders Forum is sort of shows that it's funders who are showing up once a month to learn from each other and in working groups together to interrogate our own grant practices and share. Frankly, we've had sessions like, what are the missteps? Like, what failed? What did you try to do as a funder that didn't go well? And can you be candid about having those conversations? So I do think that feedback loop from all of the research partners that we fund is important, and I think there is a real interest as well to learn from other funders. But I also sort of want to throw, I mean, I know this looks like I'm walking away from a tricky conversation, but I do think it's important to understand the landscape that funders are in as well. And, you know, all funders are different, but for, just as an example, the International Development Research Centre, we are part of the Government of Canada. So we receive our funds from Canadian taxpayers, and as such, we are accountable back to the Canadian public. So we see ourselves, we are a research for development organization. So we need to have some confidence that what we are investing is not just good quality, high quality research, and is not just influencing policy or decision making, but we need to have some confidence that it's going to achieve desired outcomes. And I know that's a long, you know, messy road, but we have to be, you know, we only receive a limited amount of funds. We've had calls for proposals where we've anticipated receiving 20 or 30 proposals, and we've received 1,600 proposals. So, like, when I say the funding landscape, it also has its limitations. And so I think there's much bigger questions about there needs to be more domestic funding from all of our governments for science and innovation, because this, you know, the way of working where we're relying on international funding and relying on philanthropies, that's not sustainable. So I think there's bigger questions. But then I also think it's understanding the context within which the different funding organizations work. So in IDRC's case, for example, we have a research quality framework where positioning research for use is considered a dimension of research quality. So if proposals sort of can't demonstrate on paper to us and convince a panel that there is a real likelihood or a high chance that some outcomes will be achieved, then it's scored low in terms of positioning for use, and that's seen as actually a research quality score. So it's just, I think understanding the context where the funders are coming is also really important when sort of preparing those proposals, and recognizing we're not perfect. We're trying, and we're trying to learn from each other, but I think we all have to be having these conversations regularly as a community.
Perfect. I hope it's fine. Oh, do you?
Juste une chose, peut-être par rapport à la problématique de la variabilité au niveau des gouvernements et la question de la continuité. Je pense qu'il faut ce qu'on doit intégrer, je pense lorsqu'on fait du EIP, c'est que le chercheur doit adapter un peu à la complexité de sa matière. Et nous travaillons avec la matière politique. Nous travaillons avec des décideurs qui sont appelés à changer. Nous travaillons dans des systèmes politiques qui changent. Donc, au-delà de faire de sorte qu'il y ait une stabilité qui ne reconnaîtra jamais, je pense qu'il faut qu'on intègre dans la démarche de EIP, de l'intégration de ces données, de cette variabilité à la fois du politique, mais aussi à cette variabilité de vision. Je pense que c'est ce qui fait un peu cet aspect-là. Et je pense pour moi, c'est des éléments à intégrer dans le cadre des démarches que nous faisons.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And sorry for rushing in the end. I know it's lunchtime and I don't want to eat too much into everyone else's lunchtime. Thank you all so much. Thanks very, very much to the panel. I really do. Yeah. I am exceptionally inspired. I think on sustainability, at least for the map, it is sustainable for a little bit. We will be having it living, and I think there are really nice technologies, right, that we are able to leverage now through AI that will allow us to keep it sustainable and keep it moving. I think a really nice thing of the map is we are getting to a point where it's both living and breathing. We're able to, reduce the amount of labor needed for updates, and subsequently, also just provide better insights in a quicker way, which is really nice. I think it's in the process, so not perfect, but we are getting there. And I hope that as a resource, the map is sustainable and living and useful, for our different contexts. I know it's not necessarily sustainable in terms of engaging with policymakers, but I do think it's a good grounding step. And I do think there's lots of really interesting studies in each of the bubbles that can help a lot and provide really good insights, in some of the areas. So, yeah. Thank you all so much, and I really appreciate this. I really enjoyed the conversation. I wish I was a participant, but yeah, it was really nice. Thank you.